Hi everyone, Craddock here. Today I'm going to go over a Vyr setup for hardcore in 2.4.1. It has a little bit more defense and utility than you might see in some of the standard Vyr setups, and I'll go over those specifics in a little bit. But I just wanted you to see some gameplay and let you know that this build is very strong. My setup right now has no augmentations, and the weapon I'm using is pretty basic. It's a non-ancient weapon, and all I've really got is close to 1,000 Paragon, and I'm still able to push a greater of 75 with ease. So it's going to be a very strong setup next season, and I hope you like it. Now let's head over to town, and I'll show you a little bit more on the gear and the skills. So here we are in town. Just an upfront note, this will not be a full build guide. I'm not going to go over the things that you would see common to most Archon builds, so like most of the Vyr's bonuses, the Chantotos, the Fazulas, the Swami, all that's pretty common, so you can look that up on another build guide if you want, but for now I'm just going to go over the differences in this setup for hardcore that you would want to select to get by with a little bit more defense and a little bit more ease of use to help prevent you from dying. Here are the skills, and here's the gear. Now there are a couple things that assist us or help us prevent us from dying in hardcore, and a couple of those things are we have increased defense, we have increased resource regeneration, and we also have a couple of utility items that help us get by. The increased defense will come from the Unity, so as you can see here I've swapped out the English Walk. I'm not wearing this set. That might be, you might see this in most Vyr's builds nowadays, but I found this to be a much more defensive setup. It's very easy to use as well. One thing you might be thinking is, well, why don't you use the Orb of Infinite Depth? It fits right into the cube, you'd have a perfect slot there, and the reason is, when you're casting Explosive Blast, there are two reasons. It will consume a charge, basically, the same as your teleport here. It goes on cooldown, and then your Zodiac ring is still proccing, but since it's a random selection at which skill is going to reduce cooldown for, either teleport or Archon, this will delay how long it takes to get Archon back up. And since we're in hardcore, we want to maximize our Archon time to make sure we have that huge defensive bonus. So if you're using teleport and Explosive Blast and Archon, you can see you may be spending a lot more time out of Archon. The other thing about the Orb of Infinite Depth is the Explosive Blast doesn't go into effect immediately when you pop out of Archon. The damage reduction from this item is not active all the time, and you're only as strong as your weakest moment, in my mind, so this is not the optimal solution, at least for defense. Now the other big thing about this build is resource management. So one of the hard things is when you get out of Archon, if you don't have enough density, even though we are using Static Discharge Arcane Torrent rune, which will proc Arcane Power and crit multiple times from our source, so that's very good with density, but when you get to lower density, sometimes for whatever reason it won't return quite as much Arcane Power as you may need, especially on single target Rift Guardians. So to make sure that we're always able to go back into Archon as quickly as possible, I've put in Arcanaut Familiar. So this will return an extra 4.5 Arcane Power per second to sort of bridge that gap so that we're not running out of Arcane Power all the time. Now, there are a couple of other items that could assist you with resource, but you're definitely going to want to make sure you have oh wow, I don't even have it assigned, but you probably want to make sure you have Inspire assigned. I guess you could opt for Guardian, but this will probably be your better choice for this particular build. So you see here in our skills section, pretty standard spells here with the Arcane Toric, Crystallized Deflection, and all the passives are pretty much the same as you would see in most Archon builds. The difference, like one of the selections that you might see change often is Teleport. Some people run Calamity, some people run Safe Passage. And the reason I've opted for Safe Passage here is we still want the ability to teleport when we're out of Archon. If we need to move, this will be our way to move around. And the damage reduction is just there to give us an extra boost in defense if we have to teleport, because when we teleport, like I said, this will keep us out of Archon longer. So there are a couple things about the gameplay with this build. One item that impacts us heavily is our Amulet. This is going to be the S of Johan is my preferred Amulet. There are a couple of, alternatives you could use, but this was my favorite by far. Perfect rolls on this item would be Intellect, Crit, and Crit hit damage, but it rolls with cooldown by default, so sometimes that's hard to get. So you could use alternate amulets, but this is really big for gameplay because it will pull enemies in and act kind of like your Rancelors or your Black Hole would to group enemies up. But the cool thing about this item is you don't even have to think about it, and it does proc more often. You may have used this item on your follower. It procs a lot more often than if you're just slotting it on your follower. For that reason, I recommend not putting it on your follower because you only want the ones, the attacks you're making to proc this item. But one other item you do want on your follower is definitely the Oculus Ring. So this will spawn rings, and you're going to want, if you can manage it, to stand within them. Sometimes the elites or the enemies are not quite as close, so you may want to use your disintegration beam from that location. Or you could use the slam if you want to. If you're close up, this will do a little bit more damage. Now, another big item that gives us the damage from the build, or a combination of items, would be the Furnace. So our weapon, the Furnace, gives us huge bonus to killing elites. Same here with the Unity, we got the elite roll here. And these two combined make it so that you won't be left out with just a couple of elites that often. It's a lot more fluid as far as killing the elites and getting them wiped out. It's a lot more fun in my opinion. So this is what we're using for damage. Boost. So there are a couple of legendary gems we're using. We're using Bane of the Trapped also for damage. Huge multiplicative bonus. Since we're in close range anyway, this will be up almost all the time. Stricken is required for killing the Rift Guardian. In my mind, this is also a defensive gem because the longer you are on the Rift Guardian, the more chance you have of dying. This gem will help you kill the Rift Guardian as quick as possible. It's also great for elites as well, so you definitely want to use this gem. Our other gem is Gogok. Gogok will help us hit that max amount of cooldown that we want. It also gives us a lot of defense and attack speed, which is really nice for this build because we need some sorts of other defense, especially for hardcore. So we have quite a bit of cooldown in this build. That's to get back into Archon as quick as possible without gimping our Chantotos stacks. So Chantotos does stack up to 20, but it stacks at a slower rate than you might see. You might be able to get back into Archon with your Zodiac proccing. So we want a certain level of cooldown to do that, and I've found that 59%, including the Gogok, is the perfect amount minimum. You can increase that by one 8% roll on gear, and that will hit you at 62% or 62.4% cooldown. That is also a very good level to be at. The 59% cooldown would be what I would call your optimistic approach, where you're hoping not to cast your teleport as much as possible. And the advantage here is you would get an extra Vyr roll on gear. As opposed to slotting that extra cooldown, you would roll cooldown on one of your other pieces, but it would allow you to cast teleport much more often, so that's more of your pessimistic or approach there. Now, pieces of gear you want to look for cooldown on include shoulder, definitely your weapon. You're probably going to want your Halo Varlise. Note here, my Halo doesn't have this because I happen to have cooldown here, but just imagine that my Halo Varlise here had the cooldown roll and this had proper rolls. There. Now, you're definitely going to want a Diamond in the Helm, Paragon, Evocation, all that normal stuff, and that will add up perfectly. This will allow you to also gain a lot of defense through Vitality. We've rolled Vitality on both our Source and our gloves. Huge boost to defense, especially for when you're out of Archon. So I think I forgot to go over some of the optional swaps that you can make. You could opt for the Mars Kaleidoscope. This would give you poison immunity. Since a lot of Rift Guardians are poison based, that's really good. It rolls with crit hit chance by default, so it's easier to get one of the easiest immunity amulets to get perfect rolls on. You could opt for the Hellfire Amulet, and instead of, you could roll any of these 4 on the Hellfire, or the other one I would look for is Astral Presence. So this would give you additional arcane power, and you might even be able to, with the Hellfire with Astral Presence, swap out Familiar Arcanaut for some other skill. If you're looking for just a general slot to put in, I would put in either Deep Freeze or Bone Chill. Those are always good options. You could roll also with the Cold Rune on Black Hole if you're slotting cold damage on your Bracer and possibly your Amulet. But really, as far as elemental affixes go, you really want to just slot whatever you can. I think Lightning would be preferred just to boost Arcane Torrent when you're out of Archon, but you really could put any element. I just have fire damage, so I'm running the Fire Archon with Fire Iron Braces. Remember, Vyrs will give us all of the Archon runes, so keep that in mind. Now, the other amulet that you could just put in, if you have a good one, is the Eye of Etlich, which gives you range damage reduction. It's pretty nice. Now, a couple of alternate gems you might want to think about using. I would swap out the Trapped first, just to go for a more defensive setup. And that you'd be putting Esoteric in place of that if you wanted to. If you wanted a more offensive setup, you would roll cooldown on your Source, possibly your gloves too, and you would slot one of these 2 gems. Pain Enhancer, in my mind, is the best offensive gem, so you'd put that in place of Gogok for the bleed and the attack speed, especially when in Archon form. That attack speed is going to be a tremendous boost in damage. The other gem is the Bane of the Powerful. This gem is multiplicative now, and it would give you extra damage and defense against elites, but you would have to kill the entire elite pack. In my mind, that's a deal breaker, especially for this Archon build where you're trying to be very mobile, trying to get around and seek out new clumps of enemies. I don't think Bane of the Powerful is the strongest pick here for an offensive gem, so keep that in mind. And I think that's it. So hope you enjoy this setup. I've been enjoying it on the PTR, and I'll throw you back into some gameplay. Thank you.